and thereafter lending her influential voice and pen to the crusade for state and federal labor legislation. She mobilized her young associates, who were mostly young women, college educated in many cases, and from comfortable backgrounds, to conduct field investigations of housing and sanitary conditions in the surrounding neighborhoods, leading to the publication of Hull House maps and papers in 1893 and many subsequent studies. This was the beginning of the field of sociology. The University of Chicago was also founded in 1893, and John Dewey and many of the early faculty of the university were very, very close to Hull House and vice versa. So she was also an ardent pacifist, and she actually earned a great deal of acrimony and threats during World War I when she opposed publicly, using her fame, her reputation, to oppose any entering of World War I. And she was the president of the International Women's Peace League. And she received, believe it or not, the Nobel Peace Prize in 1931. She was the first woman ever awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, perhaps any Nobel Prize, probably. Jane Jacobs was a marvel, and I was very humbled to learn what I did about her, because she's never covered in books on planning and cities and so forth. But she helped to define the schism or the dichotomy between the elite and the ordinary. And the historian Carl Smith, who has chronicled the history of the Plan of Chicago of 1909, the Burnham Plan, observes that, quote, Jane Addams and other settlement leaders chose to live in the neighborhoods and improve them from within in collaboration with people already living there. Daniel Burnham, who lived in the leafy suburb of Evanston, my words, and the Commercial Club, which was the male businessman's club, mostly Republican, sought to impose order from afar, represented by bird's eye views in the Plan of Chicago. Thus were starkly juxtaposed, this is my word, juxtaposed the two world views of urban improvement that would clash throughout the coming century. The top-down, expert-driven imposition of a uniform city vision congenial to the urban elite, the city beautiful in those days, and its later analog, such as urban renewal, and the bottom-up, pragmatic, and democratic efforts to solve problems at the block and neighborhood level, the settlement house movement and its descendants, such as the local initiative support corporation, Habitat for Humanity, urban agriculture, and so forth. Now, jumping quickly, because I don't want to take too much time, into part two, going from Jane Addams and at the early, first 20 years of the century, we'll jump to post-World War II and the beginnings of urban renewal across the country, and even more horrific, the public housing program, the federal public housing program, which began with good intentions as a New Deal program in the Housing Act of 1937, supported by Lewis Mumford and his coterie of idealistic and very sophisticated planners. But after World War II, it became poisoned by politics, and it was only able to build houses for the very poorest and provide the most barracks-like conditions. You remember the tall, high-rise buildings with elevators that don't work, hallways that used as urinals, crime, drugs, and in fact, welfare laws that decreed that you could only live in public housing of that type if you were very poor. And it almost systematically excluded people who had jobs or were families that were functional. So I go into some of that background in the book, but one of the joyful discoveries of this book writing process was that I made contact with Alex Polikoff, another Chicagoan, approximately contemporary of mine. He was the lawyer who fought in the federal court system for decades against the public housing program, and especially against the ghettoization of blacks in totally impossible living conditions. And this took the form of the case called Gautreaux versus Chicago Housing Authority. An aside, I took a great interest in that case when I lived there, and I continued following it from here as it went through the federal court system, up and down, district court, court of appeals, Supreme Court of the United States. I never had met Alex, who was he was organizing and leading the legal team for the plaintiffs. And Connie was always saying, when are you going to write the book about Gautreaux? The obvious title is Waiting for Gautreaux. Well, fortunately, I was spared having to do that by Alex, who wrote his memoir about 10 years ago, very readable book, called Waiting for Gautreaux. And so I had to meet him, and we've become good friends. He's still at it. He's still a public interest lawyer fighting for housing in Chicago and Cook County and nationally. So I won't read you what I was going to read. It's in chapter 3, but it's there for you to read when you have a chance. But it is a case study in the struggle for people, place, not for nature in this case, but for people and place, community. And I attribute, he's too modest to take a lot of credit, but I attribute the entire turnaround in public housing policy, such as it has been, is not doing well. But they tore down most of those high-rise projects in various cities, except in New York. That's another story. That was a Robert Moses legacy, and actually they were better built than many in other cities. But they totally changed the formula, the template for public housing, and started moving to Section 8 housing allowances, and we have a number of units under that program here in Northampton, thank goodness. And a lot of that, he won't take credit, but that Supreme Court decision in 1976 and the follow-up, the aftermath of it, helped a lot to open up at least the housing agencies to other kinds of projects and the federal authorities that fund them. What they didn't do was force public housing on the suburbs. And Alex is still fighting that battle as best he can. But in the Chicago region and all around the country, the suburbs have been except for some exceptions, of course, have been very resistant to any kind of public housing for very low-income people. Affordable housing, perhaps. Elderly housing, yes. Okay, moving on. Oh, I just have to give you this is not very surprising, but I have it in chapter 6, where I talk about the legacies of sprawl, and I write about the mismatch of demography and the housing supply as of now. This wasn't limited just to before 1990s, but the proliferation, on the one hand, of families becoming smaller, less typical, less nuclear, that only 25%, as of 2010, about a quarter of all households in the country were two families with two adults, a male and female, and children. The typical Norman Rockwell family is a vanishing species. The demand for the suburban tract homes and so forth has changed. In some markets, of course, the demand has come from immigrants, which is great for them and hopefully for the community. But that, of course, then led to a lot of predatory loan practices, which produced the bubble that caused a lot of chaos in the housing industry. But then on the other hand, the houses that have been built privately get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so the bête noire of anti-sprawlists, of course, is the McMansion, a product of the new Gilded Age of the 1980s through the mid-2000s. Well, we could probably continue it today. The McMansion is to the average home as the Hummer is to the VW Beetle. With several thousand square feet of living space, the McMansion exudes ostentation on a grand scale. Cathedral ceilings, 5 or more bedrooms and bathrooms, master suite with jacuzzi, a kitchen equipped to prepare haute cuisine, a media room, three or more car garage, and even an indoor swimming pool. Frequently, they're located in gated communities. We all know that. And like the Gilded Age cottages at Newport, Rhode Island, minus their McKim Mead and White elegance, McMansions may soon become costly relics of another age of greed and excess. Well, we'll see, but others more knowledgeable than I have predicted that, particularly Chris Nelson and Chris Leinberger, who are both economists, housing economists, who have written a great deal on this subject. Smart growth. I have to say, yes?
3 minutes.
Okay, thanks. I will actually move along and say that, just give you a sentence or two of smart growth. With striking symmetry, the 20th century opened and closed with a surge of urban evangelism. As the City Beautiful movement stirred mainstream progressives, and particularly wealthy progressives, in the early 1900s, smart growth and its cousin, new urbanism, dominated the hearts and minds of urban practitioners at the century's close, and still does. And I don't disagree with that. I think it's an important change, and I say so here. It's not the answer to everything. It's necessary but not sufficient to infill in older urban neighborhoods. It's important, and hopefully a mix of different housing costs and styles and so forth. But that's a very complex subject which I won't continue with. There was a sidebar that I wanted to share with you, but I'll just mention the subject of it, which is in Poughkeepsie, the first mini case study in chapter 10 on humane urbanism at ground level concerns the fate of one tree in Poughkeepsie. Poughkeepsie is a very small and rather poor city, surrounded by the township, the town of Poughkeepsie, where the IBM and Vassar and everything is located. The city is just a little island of poverty. There was one tree in that island that galvanized a movement, a neighborhood uprising to save it. The largest butternut tree in New York State. And it's saved. It's the smallest state park in New York State. But there are other things going on in Poughkeepsie, and much bigger scale is the walkway over the Hudson. Have any of you been there? It's great, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we want to get back there. This is the former railroad bridge that is level, like high over the Hudson, and actually over downtown Poughkeepsie. And it was abandoned a number of years ago for rail purposes. It used to bring coal from Scranton to New England. And it was the first bridge north of New York City, or south of Albany, I guess, for a long time. In any case, that bridge became available, and local activists, grassroots people with connections to foundations and political clout, in the over the last 15 years, organized the Walkway Over the Hudson Incorporated, and got a lot of money together, repaved it, relighted it, opened it up as the world's highest pedestrian and bikeway. It is really high over the river. It's 230 feet, I think. They had to allow ships to go under it, of course, without drawbridge. So that is open. It's free. It's part of the state park system now, and it's really helping downtown Poughkeepsie, I'm told. We haven't been there in a while, but it's bringing people there who never knew it existed. I'm going to close with, I can't help it, but a little bit of epilogue. to kind of wrap this up, pull it together, all these different pieces,